All right, we're going to be starting Political Trade Secrets here momentarily as the live feed is going out to all sorts of places. We're doing a live taping, and then this will be available on all the different podcast platforms, YouTube, Facebook, X account, all that places. And you can go ahead and subscribe there. But it's going to be an interesting show. Sheriff Rich Giardino is here with me, and we're going to be starting the show momentarily. And Rich is interesting because he's a former prosecutor, former judge, current sheriff, former law school professor, all that stuff. And we're going to be talking about all the legal cases touching politics today and interesting things like that. Talk about lawfare, all of that. So, Rich, you were just telling me right before we hit the live stream button that Fulton County, where you're at, is the number one place for gloves for World War II.
World War I, World War II, and afterwards. Gloversville's our largest city, and that was where a lot of immigrants came over from Germany and Italy and got into the manufacturing business. And they produced all the gloves for the U.S. military and gloves for a lot of our allies overseas. They were the largest producer, hence Gloversville.
Cool. Well, that'll be interesting. So in a moment, we'll be starting the show, and for anybody who is out there watching, please do join us. Sean, you might give Josh a call and just tell him to do it here in a moment, and that'll be good. We'll be starting the show here momentarily. We're waiting for people to be able to stream in for the live taping, and this will be available on all the podcast platforms later, and encourage people to join us for that. And join us live. I'm sending a text out to some people who want to join. All right. See that now. Perfect. And we have Sean here. If you know Sean, he's producing the show today. And thank you, Sean, for doing that. We'll be starting up here momentarily. And people are streaming in across different platforms. We're on 9 different platforms right now. So you'll be able to ask questions during the show. We'll have the chat up, and wherever you are watching this, you can post a comment or question. If we don't get to it, we will come back to it at some point during the next day or two, and just make sure that we acknowledge what you have to say, and we use that to determine what kind of comments and also content that we do later on with the show. So please do join us and share. Right now we're going through and we're sharing it to all of our different accounts, and we'll be getting started here shortly. So, Rich, you also said that Fulton County is a key place for the film industry.
Yeah, it's true. The Shine family, which was part of Metro Goldwyn Mayers in the 40s, 50s, and into the 60s, were 2 premier theaters. We had an amphitheater. We had a large 2 theaters here. They had a lot of premieres here. At one point, many of the movies were premiered in our city of Gloversville. They're redoing the Glove Theater, which was one of the Starship theaters for them. It was very well received in the area. People don't know, but Broderick Crawford from Highway 66 was buried in one of our local cemeteries. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's a lot of history here.
That's awesome. Well, with that, feel free. So this is going to be live here shortly. We're going to hit the go button, and we're going to be coming back to you with the actual program. But feel free to post comments and questions. This is kind of the behind the scenes before we get the program started. But feel free to post questions, comments. Subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, other places. You'll get the edited version that's all polished and everything later. But right now you're getting the raw live taping, and we really do appreciate that. But with that, I think we're ready to get on with the show, and thank you, Sean, for producing, and we'll see you later.
Welcome to Political Trade Secrets, an inside look at campaigns and politics, where we pull back the curtain, look under the hood, and investigate all aspects of politics and how elections are won. Now, Here's your host, Dustin Olson.
Pollster and host of the Political Trade Secrets podcast, Dustin Olson.
Dustin Olson.
Dustin Olson.
And Dustin Olson, pollster at American Pulse. They work for both Republicans and Democrats. And he hosts a podcast, Political Trade Secrets. Oh, we love that. We like that podcast.
Now, from Washington, D.C., is pollster.
And welcome to the show. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here. We're going live across the internet and also on all sorts of podcast platforms. Feel free to go ahead and subscribe, like, and share the show. Today, we're going to be talking about all the recent legal cases. We have the CEO killer. We have all the lawfare cases. A lot of them kind of getting tied up in a bow here after Donald Trump's historic win. We have all sorts of, let's see, I've got a whole list here. Daniel Penny, we've got the Biden clemency and pardon train. We've got preemptive pardons. We're going to be talking about all the different possible legal cases. And I thought the best idea would be to have someone with the absolute most legal experience you could possibly have. He's a former judge, he's a former prosecutor, he's a former law school professor, and he's a current sheriff. His name is Rich Giardino, and he's also part of the Elite Influencer Network, which Political Trade Secrets is a part of. And he has a show called, you guessed it, the Rich Giardino Show. So we're going to have him on here in a moment and pick his brain on all these different topics. You might see him on Newsmax or Fox News or News Nation, other places that he's talking about all these different topics as a expert on lawfare and the kind of really the intersection. What he really specializes is the intersection of politics and the law and the Constitution. And we'll talk about that, also about the Rich Giardino Show, which I do think you should check out. I've learned a lot from it myself. But for Political Trade Secrets, if you could like, share, and subscribe, go to YouTube, go to Apple Podcasts, go to Spotify. We're everywhere, whatever you're watching on right now. So for those who are watching live, if you are following us on any one of the social media sites that we have, if you follow or like us there and you get notifications, you'll be able to know when we go live with all sorts of different interviews with experts in politics and who can really kind of peel back what's actually happening and how the politics is actually getting done. And as we go into this whole new era, it's going to be really helpful to have those insights. So with that, please join me for a great conversation with Sheriff Rich Giardino. All right. Welcome, Sheriff Rich Giardino. It's great to have you on Political Trade Secrets. I've been on the Rich Giardino Show, which was a great pleasure of mine. And I'm going to be on next week as well to talk about one of our upcoming polls from American Pulse. And I'm really looking forward to that. But today I'm looking forward to having this conversation. So welcome.
Welcome. Hey, Dustin, thank you very much for having me on. I think it's a great opportunity. This is such a fascinating time when you take the Constitution and all the cases going on and all different levels, all different things from the lawfare to homicides to some bizarre things that have gone on in this country on all levels. So I enjoy the opportunity to be on with you, and I hope that your viewers enjoy it as much as I'll enjoy being here.
Yep, absolutely. So we are in kind of this interesting time. One thing I noticed, one of the reasons I asked you to be on, is that you have this rich background. Pardon the pun. Your name's Rich, but it's a rich legal background. You've done all sorts of different things in the legal realm, and there's very few people I've seen who it's a deep experience, but it's also from lots of different perspectives. So you can put on the robe of a judge and look at the world from the perspective of a judge. You can put on the suit of a prosecutor and look at the world from the perspective of the prosecutor. You can put on the badge and look at the world from the perspective of a sheriff. as someone in law enforcement and really look at it from all these different places. And then as a sheriff, you're also elected, and you can look at it from the perspective of an elected official. So it's a lot of different perspectives. And as I mentioned also, that you have been a law professor as well. So you've talked about these issues to students learning about the law. So I really thought it'd be interesting to have you on. And plus, you're on the Elite Influencer Network, so it's good to have one of my compadres there. So I would like to know a little bit about all that background. So what was the first, like, why did you even get into the legal profession? I don't think I've ever asked you that before.
Well, I had an uncle who was a lawyer, and he was into municipal law and governmental law, and his partners were into criminal law and real estate. And when I was in third grade, I was sick as a kid. I missed a half a year of school, and he used to bring me transcripts of cases he had, hearings and things, and I read a lot of those. And when I was in college at Siena College, I decided, geez, I want to go to law school. And I always favored law school. Went to Albany Law School, and I had several interviews at the FBI, actually. And I had several interviews at the Nassau County DA's office. And the DA's office offered me a job on a Thursday and said I had to have an answer by Tuesday of the following week. Meanwhile, the following week, I had my final interview with the FBI. So I called the FBI and I said, is there any way you can push the interview back and give me a little more time? And I called the DA's office and said, could I have an extension of a week or two? And they said, we have 1,500 applications for 35 spots. And they said, you got to have an answer first Tuesday. So my father, with his ultimate wisdom, said, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, that old saying. And he said, take the job you have offered. And I took the job as an assistant DA in Nassau County. In my summers prior to that, I worked as a police officer in a small village. And I worked in Yarmouth, Massachusetts, Cape Cod. So those were fun jobs. Started as an ADA in Nassau, moved up to Fulton County. I was an assistant DA. Assistant DA quit, and we had a small county, and I was asked to take the job, and I took it. Wanted to be back home. And next thing you know, I was running for district attorney, and I served as a district attorney. I was in my second term when Governor Pataki appointed me to a vacancy on the bench. A very good judge, a learned scholar, and a good man passed away. And my name was put forth, and Governor Pataki nominated me, and I ran in November, and then I ran a second term. I tried cases in 14 counties in the state, including 40 homicide and attempted homicide cases, a lot of drug cases, sex offenses. And then the sheriff called me one day and he says, you always like cops and robbers. And I thought, well, here's my opportunity to restart. Instead of going to the FBI, going back into law enforcement. So I've been a sheriff for now 9 years, and I'm in my third term.
That's
so
awesome.
I've had quite a rich experience. I wish I like what I've learned, because I learned a lot of things, but I wish that I had done it in the reverse. I thought maybe sheriff, DA, and judge, but doing it, the way I did it, I learned that by the time stuff gets from the police officers to the DA, because the DA handles all the agencies in a county, and by the time it gets to a county or superior court judge like I was, it gets so watered down. So what starts as maybe a 1 week serious investigation gets synthesized down to an indictment by the DA with some discovery and a grand jury presentment. And then when it finally gets to the judge, it's here's the rap sheet, here's the offer, and here's the indictment. So you don't get the full context of what the police officers go through every day. So even though I was a village police officer part-time, it's a little different than being a full-time sheriff responsible for 135 people in a jail, communications, 911 center, and a road patrol and investigations. So I was very fortunate. I've had jobs that most lawyers or people in law enforcement would, be a dream job for them. And I've had 3 of those jobs. And now I do the podcast, which is fun. So it's kind of eye-opening to see it from different standpoints, because I question my people. Well, I look at it this way, you got to remember that the standard for an arrest is proof, is probable cause, and the trial is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I often encourage my people, don't stop at probable cause for an arrest. Put your case together like you're presenting it to a jury, because we don't want to just have enough to arrest somebody. We want to be able to convict them if they indeed committed a crime. And so it's been a great learning curve for me. And again, I see sometimes I get too technical and get into the thick of the weeds instead of concentrating on the, overall.
All the sizzle of the bacon.
Yes, exactly.
So I get that, and here we're really on Political Trade Secrets. We want to pull back the curtain and give people a real inside look as to how things work. And in multiple of those jobs, those are actual elected officials, they're politicians, the prosecutor, the sheriff, and in a lot of cases, judges even as a political position, as you mentioned, being elected to that. And that's not the way it is everywhere. But you said you kind of did, you'd like to have done it in reverse. Is that because then you'd have more empathy or understanding of what the law enforcement officer does at the front end, and you would have if you as a judge, you would have had a greater sense for all that went into what showed up there with you on the bench?
Exactly. I think things get so synthesized down to a 5-page indictment that could have been 100 to 200 pages of police reports and 25 interviews, and so it gets watered down. But one thing is, being politics, all 3 of my jobs were political. I was appointed at first, which was based on merit, I'd like to think, and then elected to the judgeship. But interestingly, I have found with politics, in the smaller area you are, like in my county, it's like everybody knows you. And sometimes politics on a smaller, like I listen to people complain about some of the national politics. Well, it can be just as vicious in localities, because there were people I found that would come up to me and remembered that I reduced a traffic ticket for them, 15 years before, that I didn't remember. And to them, that traffic ticket was a big deal. But then there were people who I put their kid in prison for a sex offense, and they didn't care that it was a sex offense with a little child. They were more upset with me because I put their kid in prison as a DA or a judge. So you get a lot of enemies on a lower level that play into politics. But I've been very fortunate because the people in my community have supported me in all of my positions. My last time I ran, I had 87% of the vote in the general election unopposed, but most candidates get 60 to 65% unopposed. So I've had a lot of support, which I've always appreciated. Part of it is my dad was a pediatrician for 50 years and took care of 50% of the county. So I suppose that helped a little bit.
Makes sense. He took care of kids that were then later on your voters. I assumed it was your amazing personality is why you got such a big vote, but that also makes sense. Something that's interesting, you mentioned the local politics. Something I'd like to, it wasn't one of the topics we mentioned beforehand, but I'm curious about some of the pardons, and in particular this one in Pennsylvania that Josh Shapiro has spoken out against Biden on, where you have this basically pay to play situation with a judge putting people into for-profit prisons. And one of the kids committed suicide after coming out of that, and just how horrendous that was. And people locally remember it. And it was just one of the 1,500 or so clemencies that Biden did, and wasn't either paying attention, or I have a theory as to why there might be so many of these. But I'm curious what you thought of that case that's happened in the last 24 hours from when we're live taping it. By the way, for those watching while we're live taping, do follow or like us on the platform that you're following us on right now, and do post a comment or question. If you have any questions about any legal cases that are going on right now that kind of touch into politics, and you'd like to get a judge's perspective, a prosecutor's perspective, a sheriff's perspective, you'll be able to do that right now, or a law professor's perspective. So please do post a comment. And if you're watching this later on one of the podcasting platforms, again, write a review or post a comment, because we will follow back up with that, and we do appreciate the feedback. So Rich, what'd you make of that, having been a judge and Josh Shapiro is a former prosecutor. It's what do you make of that whole situation?
It was a disgusting pardon. This is corruption of the system. When a judge is farming kids out from his family court position to make money and to for-profit detention centers, and then gets indicted and convicted and sentenced. It's a perversion of the justice system when he's pardoned, and nobody consulted with the families.
Yeah.
None of the victims were consulted. And like you said, there was a suicide, but there was abuse at some of these places. And this went on for years. And there were more than just the judge. There were other parties who were part of the system. So when people look at the system and something like that happens, that's the type of person who should sit in jail and sit in prison and do their entire term.
Yeah.
So it really, when you're doing these blanket pardons and clemency and, in bragging that, the most pardons issued in one day, well, not everybody deserves a pardon, and there's no way could they have vetted them in such a short time. Usually they check with the local prosecutors, the pardons office, to see, what's behind the conviction,
Do you have any explanation as to, why are they even making a big deal about these are the most clemencies and the most pardons? And at this point, he's on track. He will be, I think, the closest number of clemencies from a presidency, which was a 2-term presidency, was Barack Obama. And it's by a magnitude quite a bit lower than what Biden has done. What do you make of that? Like, what's the purpose of it? And I'm asking you to put your political pundit hat on, which you do often on network television. What do you make of that? Like, what is the purpose of doing that?
Dustin, what it is, it's smoke and mirrors to detract people from the Hunter Biden pardon.
Yeah.
And the Hunter Biden pardon is unique for 2 reasons. One, he's pardoning his own son. And a lot of people said to me, well, the father's going to pardon his son. But I said, well, not when they've said they believe in the system and they're not going to pardon their son. But the second
I think most of us thought he was lying the whole time.
Yeah, correct. But I think what's significant about this, to me, is that it gets you tied up in all these other pardons and clemency cases that you're not paying attention. He got a lot of blowback from Democrats and progressives. Well, what about others? What about other people? So by doing such a big batch of pardons, he's hoping that that'll water down the criticism of Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see another batch, probably of a lot of drug dealers and people who had large amounts of drugs and part of the syndicates. Because I think he's going to want to say, look, I didn't just pardon my own son who had a drug problem. I pardoned these other people who were in the business. But there's 2 kinds of drug dealers in our society. There's a nickel and dimers who are doing it because they got a drug problem and they want the drugs for themselves too, to buy more drugs to use.
Their avocations or avocation.
Yeah, I had one guy.
They're doing what they love.
That's it. It's easy to him. One fellow I sent to prison, I said, listen, I'm giving you 7 years. I could have given you 15. He said to me, Judge, I don't know anything else. I'll be back. That's the avocation. That's his occupation. I had one trial of a murderer who murdered another guy for drugs. And the kid was like 19 years old. And the prosecutor says to him, how much money were you making a week? And the defendant on the stand to defend himself started laughing. And he said, I make more in a week than you probably make in a year. He said that. And because his defense, they had him for a couple of 8 balls, which is a small amount. Well, unless it kills you, it's not a small amount.
Yeah.
But a small amount of cocaine compared to kilos. And he also had an AR-15. And the AR-15, the search warrant and the search was suppressed. It was another judge that suppressed it before trial. But he wanted to testify and represent himself against his advice to counsel and against my advice to take the stand. His position was these 8 balls, the 4 sales he made, that's not him. He's a big time dealer. He's got the AR-15. And he said, and I said, but it's been suppressed. They won't know about that unless you bring it out. He wanted to bring out that I'm a big dealer. And he thought that by saying he's such a big dealer, that they would believe that he wouldn't waste his time selling a little bit of that to a confidential informant. So you don't know what goes through these guys' minds, but but it's so tempting when you're a young kid to get dragged into that culture,
Yeah.
you know? So I think you're going to see a lot of drug dealers with a sweep of his pardon pen, and a lot of other users and other individuals. So he can say, look, I didn't just pardon my son, I pardoned other people, you know, without looking at the damage that they did to other people's lives and the death.
I'm not going to ask you to comment on this because it might be a controversial. I'm not going to say this is what I believe, but if there were such thing as enterprising investigative journalists in this country who, not just on on the right, but there are people in the middle and on the left who would actually look into this, uh, it seems to me like that for-profit prison scheme with the judge. Joe Biden's going to be dead broke after all of this. I think a lot of the Biden family corruption issues have been, brought into daylight, even though nothing's going to happen about them. But they've been brought into daylight. There's not a lot of people who want to pay him for books, think he can even write a book, are going to pay him for speeches because I don't think they think he can give a speech. There's really no way for them to make money. And when you have this unprecedented number of clemencies and pardons, I think an investigative journalist should start looking at where those, out of 100, where's that one that looks like it's a sweet deal that might have deep pockets behind it, and who might be getting paid or whatnot. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but I think this is just so different that it's worth people looking into it. So if you're a journalist, that's something I'd recommend checking out. I had no idea if it's true, but it smells funny, honestly, to me, as to how this is happening.
Well, take a look at the Clinton Global Initiative when he was president, and they raked in right after that millions and millions of dollars that they divvied up to Haiti and some other places. They did some good work with it, but they had a lot of high-paying jobs for people who used to work in the administration. When Hillary was running for president and Secretary of State, that was still a very popular thing for millionaires and billionaires to donate to. As soon as she lost the presidency, you can take a look at their financial reports because it dropped precipitously, like 50%. So it may not be as nefarious as to them individually. It may be to the Biden Library and Museum. Denise Rich donated a lot of money, and Bill Clinton pardoned her husband, So
one of his most controversial pardons was Mark Rich.
Yeah, Mark Rich. And he pardoned his stepbrother, but I think his stepbrother's case, I don't think his stepbrother was involved in drugs. It was a bad case, but I think he'd served so much. I think his was a pardon years later after Roger Clinton was out of jail, did his time, and was, whatever.
And this is the thing, I think, from being a pollster and really having a finger on public opinion. I don't think people, and this is one of the things the Bidens have going for them, people really kind of understand the family connection. So, while it might be obvious that some people are above the law, obviously based off of this, but people also, that's why people knew that Biden was lying the whole time when he said he wasn't going to pardon his son, because that would have made him a terrible father. And he's probably a terrible father in many ways, but that's not one of the ways that most people expected that he would be. And it just wasn't believable. I would have preferred they just be honest, but that's just, it is what it is, I guess. Well, moving on from the clemencies and the pardons, and there's probably more to discuss on that. There's a few topics that I'm curious about, and I'm going to ask you to pick which one you'd like to talk about, because there's a lot of stuff that's been in the news on legal cases. We had the United Healthcare CEO assassination, horrible situation. We had, I think, what gave me some trust that justice is still there, with Daniel Penny being found not guilty. Laken Riley trial that happened that was related to the absolutely broken border that we have, and we have the Trump trial that we had in Manhattan, and that's keeps continuing to be in the news. Something that you've talked about that I think is interesting is this Kentucky judge and sheriff is a whole different weird situation. And something I've been watching on your podcast is you've been doing a series on cold cases. People, if they're interested in cold cases, they can check out the Rich Giardino show. But you've been talking about a local case there in Fulton County from years ago and having people related to it come on. And really, one of the reasons you do cold cases, I think, is to get people to possibly bring in new leads for something that people just don't have anything that they can follow at this point. So of those, what's one of those that you'd like to talk about?
Well, let's talk about Daniel Penny. Daniel Penny was the absolutely correct verdict. That case should never have been brought. It was an abuse of prosecutorial authority, if you ask me. The police didn't arrest him right away. The witnesses said they were scared to death, and the DA went and indicted him. And the judge allowed the assistant district attorney to keep saying the white man and the black man, the white man and the black man, obviously playing race into it. I don't think that was racial. I think that if the roles were reversed and Daniel Penny was black and the other gentleman was white, he would have done the same thing. If he was a Marine, he would have done the same thing and stepped up Daniel Penny. Mm-hmm. I think it's disgusting. Well, first of all, anytime you lose a life, it's unwarranted. It's sad. But I don't believe Daniel Penny caused the death of the individual. And I'm even more offended that he could have been arrested over 45 times, many of them violent crimes. Everyone in the system identified him with having mental health problems. They could have involuntarily committed him. They could have gotten him assisted outpatient treatment. And then his father now wants to sue Daniel Penny civilly for criminal negligence of his daughter, of his son. And the question is, what steps did his father take over the last 40 years or 35 years to help his son?
I've been wondering about that. It just occurred to me in the last couple of days that, it's obvious the system failed him.
I agree.
And that, we ended up with a situation where someone was dangerous on the subway. A lot of cases like that. Whenever I'm in New York City and on the subway, it's definitely have your guard up. So the system failed them, but then who's the most important people to any individual? It's the people in their family. Will this be part of the strategy for a court case, for the civil case? I mean, Daniel Penny is not the problem, and it's hard to say to people who lost a loved one, but they failed their loved one. They are probably the most guilty of anybody for having failed this person. And a lot of people have difficult situations in their families and whatnot, and you can't control people. So, but that's the case. Everybody's either guilty or everybody's innocent in this situation, right?
Well, I got to be honest with you. When I used to complain about the criminal justice system, and I used to complain about that we would house individuals that have mental health problems. More than 75% of the people in our local and state and federal prisons have substance abuse problems or mental health problems or co-occurring disorders. And one of the things people don't understand is in our state, the bail situation where everyone gets an appearance ticket unless it's a violent felony, everyone gets out. It's what happened is drug treatment courts were started by Janet Reno, a Democrat, when she was a state's attorney. It was continued under Bill Clinton nationwide. And drug treatment courts were excellent because you arrest somebody whose crime was related to drugs, that was nonviolent crime, and they were either doing it because they were high on drugs or doing it to support a drug habit. And we would say, you're going to jail or you're going inpatient treatment. I was a drug treatment court judge. And it was extremely effective because if they relapsed or if they didn't report to probation or they didn't take a drug test or they were positive, I could put them in jail for a weekend, a week, a couple weeks, or I could make them go back inpatient and do outpatient. By taking away the bail situation, they took away the coercive part of bail. And you got to remember, in the Constitution, the purpose of bail is to ensure somebody returns. Mm-hmm. But under a Democratic president and a Democratic Attorney General, Janet Reno, they realized and understood the importance of coerced treatment to break the cycle. I had individuals who went out and got jobs and paid for their kids that they hadn't paid for in years. I had a couple individuals start their own businesses that are still thriving because we broke the cycle. But this bail has done damage beyond repair to so many people who needed it the most. And a lot of it is, people who would not otherwise have access to treatment. And so by taking away the stick and the coercion of saying you're going to jail or you're going to treatment, we lost a lot in New York State.
So the bail reform is what changed that.
I think bail reform changed our option. The other thing is the victim in this case, the individual who died in this case, and everyone's a victim if they die unnecessarily. But again, I don't blame Mr. Penny.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Penny did what was reasonable. The jury felt that way. I just think that it was abuse to get that far. But they could have years ago along the way. You said it. The system spotted this. Everyone knew this. By some reports, he was on a list of 100 people in New York City who had been repeatedly arrested without getting mental health treatment. And you can see a lot of the shoving people into the subway, some of the beating people randomly. They're not for robbery. They're just people who are mentally ill and not getting treated and not having medication, not being followed up on. So a lot of it is mental health and a lot of it is the system. One thing I will tell you that I've learned about the criminal justice system, and I used to teach this to my kids in college and at law school, the criminal justice system is the only system that is a reflection of all the failures of society. It's a reflection of the failures of family. It's a reflection of the failures of the individual who doesn't pull themselves up and do something with their life. It's a reflection of the failures of the education system, of social services, of the mental health system, because we get them in jail instead of in mental health. Mm-hmm. And actually, it's the failures of the criminal justice system itself. Mm. And now it's broadened to be the failures of government and the politicians who craft these laws and rules without asking for input by district attorneys, by sheriffs, by police, by judges, by probation and parole. They take one bad case and they change the whole system, turn it upside down. And it's this equality. And if you talk and you look at the polls like Minneapolis and other inner cities, Detroit, people don't realize that we had a terrible school shooting yesterday, and we've had 83 school shootings this year, 83. And what people don't realize is if you go to Chicago, Baltimore, or Detroit, you have young kids who are getting killed in drive-bys. Some of them are playing in a playground. Others are on their front porch, their front lawns, walking on the streets because they get killed by random shots from drug dealers who have beefs with other drug dealers, and they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you don't hear all that outcry that you should hear. So it's the inner city that a lot of these young kids are dying that we don't hear about. Yeah. And that's what's unfair, I mean, the people in inner cities, according to the polls, they want more law enforcement, but they want better law enforcement.
Yeah.
And they don't get it. They don't get the help they want. Instead, a whole movement was started on defund police. It should be fund police, but educate them. You can't give somebody 16 hours of mental health training and then send them out to deal with people who have a lifetime of mental health issues on the street. And we get called for everything. Yeah. Police get called for everything from disorderly conducts to car accidents to stabbings to people being pushed in the subway, So they call the police.
You get called whether the people like law enforcement or not.
Yeah. Well,
this is interesting with the defund the police movement. It's amazing how many, I don't know, it's at least a handful now of cases of people who were part of the defund the police movement who have needed the police over the last few years and have been upset when it doesn't work the way that it used to, and police are able to respond quickly. There's a lady, I think in San Francisco, who all of her possessions were in a moving truck and they got stolen. And she thought the police were too slow to respond. But this is the issue that, as a pollster watching this entire election cycle, one of the things that I saw was that, common sense was a really good common thread that the Trump campaign used. And you saw a lot of Democrats, people like an Elon Musk and other prominent Democrat donors, even who are in business, who just gave up with the Democrats because they're pushing things that are obviously not true or obviously not going to work, like defunding the police. Now, going back to Neely, the Neely family and this civil suit. Before I do that, though, if you're watching the live stream, do like, share, and subscribe. But feel free to post a comment or question, and we'll include it in the show. And then if you're watching or listening on podcast platforms later, do subscribe. Subscribe on YouTube. It's really helpful to us, and we do appreciate it. And if you'd like to get the live streams, follow us on any one of those social media, YouTube, Facebook, X, and you will be notified when we go live with one of the shows. You can participate in the live program. So with the Neely family doing the civil trial against Daniel Penny, what's your prediction as a former New York State judge, having served there and having been a prosecutor, and you're in a unique position? What do you think is going to happen with that kind of a trial?
It's really going to depend on the jury, but let's face it, it's the reason that he was dead was not because of Daniel Penny. The reason he was dead was because he didn't get the mental health treatment he needed and the substance abuse treatment he needed. So I think that the question of what did his family do or should have done more, that will not probably come up in the civil trial because it's not relevant.
Mm-hmm.
The civil trial is going to be about the actions of Mr. Penny on the subway. I think that it becomes I think it becomes no cause, that they'll dismiss the charges. It's different than a criminal case. Civil case is over damages and injury, and it's it's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's by a preponderance of the evidence. So think of like 51-49.
Mm-hmm.
So the burden is much lesser on a plaintiff in a civil case than it is in a criminal case. But I did want to go back quickly to what we were talking about. And I just mentioned this about President Trump and the attacks on President Trump. And without getting too deep in all those cases, I firmly believe, and I think your polling and other polling has shown that the people on both sides of the spectrum, and particularly in the middle, the independents, felt that it was lawfare.
Yep.
And he was unfairly targeted. And a lot of his message was, if they can do this to me, think of what they can do to you. And I think that was highly effective. And I think that many people from all the positions looking at this felt, why did they wait so many years to bring some of these cases? Why did they bring 16-year-old cases? Why did they bring a case of fraud when everyone got their money and none of the people who were supposedly committed the fraud against had any complaints because they all made their money?
Yeah.
So
well, there's no victim in the business records case.
Correct. Yeah.
And then with the I can't remember that judge, the first goofy judge that he dealt with. I mean, it's just constant, and how much money that they've attempted to siphon from the former president, now soon to be president again. It's amazing just how much they've gone after him, and we've seen even in the last few days. I think it's Nathan Wade, right, is the prosecutor from Georgia, who has admitted under oath, I think, in Congress, that he had been coordinating with the Biden White House. It all looked exactly like what it was, and a lot of people have reacted to it. And it's interesting. I believe it's 22 or so of the George Soros funded prosecutors have been removed from office in the last in this election cycle, either through recalls or through the re-election campaigns. They were defeated, even in places around California. It's a big deal. And I'm curious, how do you actually get rid of Alvin Bragg? Because so many of these problematic cases have to do with the attorney general in your state and also the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg. Is there any way that he ever is removed from office, or do you think it's possible that he would be defeated in running again?
I don't think he'd be defeated in New York City. What's really weird about that is they're both suffering more than other people, and black on black crime is more common than black on white crime or white on black crime. So, and he's made a whole thing of race since he's been there, and starting from the beginning. Same thing with Letitia James. She ran for Attorney General of the state of New York on a platform that she was going to get Donald Trump. The Attorney General and DAs are not supposed to be vindictive or use the law to suit their own purposes. They're supposed to follow the facts, follow the law, and make their decisions based on that. Not start with, we're going to get Donald Trump. Now let's see which way we can do it. You got to remember the case that Bragg brought was decided by the DA before him in the office not to pursue. Mm-hmm. And Tish James' case was just, like I said, no victims. And I don't even mean a victimless crime. I mean no victims. Nobody was out money. Yeah. So it's not like let's
and it hadn't been used before. Most of these situations, they haven't used the law that way. Is that correct?
Correct. In the one conviction of the 34 counts in the last 3 years, there've been 11 cases in New York City. 11 cases in 3 years. Only one of them got prison, and he had a prior record. But those were concrete cases. So this is not, when you have all those cases in the system, that number of cases. I mean, I asked Division of Criminal Justice Services for the stats. Mm-hmm. I do think people believed that the system was politicized, and that I think your polling showed some of that too.
It was like 82%.
Yeah,
80.5% of the public believed that the legal and justice system had a double standard, and that was across party. Obviously, 80+% that's going to be Democrats and Republicans, and they see it differently. Sometimes from the left, it's a little bit more racial as to how they see there's a double standard. But all those things. Whenever we have a miscarriage of justice, or whenever we have someone abusing the law, or somebody who's making false claims against somebody, all that stuff are these ultimately attacks on the legal system and serve to reduce its credibility. And I think the Democrats in particular over the last 4 years have done a lot to harm it. Actually, the last 8 years since the Russia collusion hoax, and in abusing law enforcement and the legal and justice system to go after Republicans. And it's not just Donald Trump who has been the victim of lawfare. You have a number of Trump appointees, advisors who claimed executive privilege. And even though people in the Biden administration have claimed executive privilege, these folks have gone to prison and have served their term. There's no way for that to ever be taken back. You have Elon Musk, who I believe is under lawfare in Delaware, and his compensation package for X, it's been denied multiple times. And you have the current president, I guess he is, Joe Biden, saying that that they're going to be looking into Elon Musk multiple times over the last few years. There are a lot of people who have been targeted by this regime, and it's not just Donald Trump, but Donald Trump was ultimately the biggest fanfare, and I think he leaned into it. I think it's why people really do respect him. He showed courage and bravery in the face of all of this. And most people would not be able to handle that. He spent a good portion of the campaign, the first part of the general election, in a courtroom, and he used it to his advantage ultimately, because it's become enough is enough for a lot of Americans.
I agree with you. And I think you have to remember, I remember a speaker I had in law school who said, the justice system is just us.
Yeah.
And he was referring to white versus black. That's how it was looked at as divisive, that, well, if you were the wrong color, you were going to jail and prison. If you were the right color, you weren't, and I'm saying those are the phrases used back in the 80s, and then it became just us, and it was rich and poor. If you had money, you could defeat things. And now I think it's more politicized. It's not white or black. It's not rich or poor. It has to do with what side is in control of the criminal justice system.
Is it which side's in control of the judicial system, or is it one side?
It's I'm saying the perception.
Yeah.
I'm saying the perception. And we've seen it just so blatantly. Like Mershon should have recused himself.
Yeah.
Here's the thing I don't get. When you're a judge, it's not only whether there's a true conflict, it's whether there's the appearance of a conflict. His daughter works for the Democrats making millions of dollars. And part of the message that she makes money on is selling that Trump is a criminal, Trump's a bad guy.
Yep.
Her father, just
And
the
one
appearance.
of her clients was the Biden-Harris campaign.
Yeah, just the appearance is enough. That, you know what I mean? So it's not whether or not there's a true conflict, it's whether there's an appearance. And it's, to me, these judges don't have the moral fiber to say, hey, we should recuse ourselves from this case and let somebody else handle it. They don't have that.
So do you think this is, with Donald Trump winning and with there being clear repudiation of the lawfare over the last few years, even to the last month or so, even the most partisan of Democrats stopped talking about it, and they stopped calling him a criminal and all that stuff. They stopped it, and now we have ABC News. I'm curious as to what you think about that. They settled this defamation lawsuit, and it's amazing that Stephanopoulos is now going to have to even put money into the pot for this, and it's going to go to the Trump library. Trump has a whole nother term, and he's well ahead of Joe Biden in being able to pay for a presidential library. It's amazing. Like, when you look at that case, is that a little bit surprising to you that a journalistic institution is now having they've agreed to pay out this money, and it's to avoid a trial, right?
It's to avoid a trial most cases. But here's what's interesting. There must be emails and things in discovery and through the depositions that Trump's legal team found out that ABC would have been embarrassed. But don't you think it's more interesting, the deafening silence of the rest of the media? Because when Fox News had to pay out millions of dollars, they couldn't stop talking about Fox is corrupt. Look at them. They had to pay this money out, So they went after Fox News, but yet you don't hear anything about ABC. And so, and some of the commentators, what I did hear was how chilling effect it has on journalism. What a chilling effect. No.
Has a chilling effect on lying through your teeth.
Yeah, you still have to be fair. And it's interesting because 90% of the coverage was favorable to Kamala Harris, and 85% plus was negative to Trump. And they don't even get that the people want the news. There's a difference between your show or when I do a podcast or the cable news networks at night. They're entertainment. But when you're doing a news presentation, a Sunday morning show or the evening news, they want the news. They don't tune in the news to hear somebody's opinion. They turn into the entertainment shows to hear an opinion. And I think that's why you've seen,
Rich, most people want their news to fit their worldview.
Correct.
That's just
how I guess so. But let's face it, CNN and MSNBC have lost so many, large percentages, a third or more of their viewership. And Fox always dominated. And some people would defend it to me saying, well, Fox dominates because there's only one conservative, red meat station, but there's two over here, so they split it up. No, CNN used to try to be fair, and they're not fair. They're not fair with a lot.
They aren't fair, though. There have been some changes over there. They seem to be doing slightly better. I guess we will wait to see. Honestly, I would say on this podcast, if anybody's paid attention to any of these stories that we've talked about during this program, you probably got more details and more of how it actually is working from your knowledge than you would have ever gotten from a show, which this is something that's interesting that we have been doing at American Pulse, and people can go to pollingclub.com and sign up to get our polls. You'll be able to get some of our previous polling, because we've been asking this question. And it's one of the reasons why I podcast, why we have the podcast network, Elite Influencers Network, that you're a part of with the Rich Giardino show, is that we have seen this elevation of what we call podcasts, live streams, and internet shows. This is really where people are getting their news now. In our studies, it's been about 1 out of 5 people are getting their news there. If you include social media, it gets up to about 1/3 of people get it from there. That's pretty amazing when you think about how that's changed over time. Pew Research also did a recent survey that they found the same thing. 1 out of 5 get their news from what they call news influencers, people with podcasts like yours, and people who are just folks on X who've done their own kind of investigative journalism. It's really been interesting to see how that's changed. And it's why a podcast like yours that focuses on the legal aspects, the political aspects, and the Constitution is valid and useful for people, because it's a way for them to actually get educated on these things that they will never get from the network news. They will never get from CNN or anywhere else. It really is valuable to people to have that kind of content, and people are definitely seeking it out, and it has changed the landscape. We've also found of the kind of mainstream media, in our final poll where we asked this question this year, 47% got their news about the presidential election from the legacy media or the mainstream media, or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
That is still a lot, and they were able to prop up Harris for a couple months, and they were able to take her unfavorable numbers from back when she was the least favorable, most unfavorable public opinion for a vice president back in June. And then they took her to being, on par with Trump in a matter of weeks. But of course, that ultimately crumbled. But I think this was the last gasp of that kind of media, and I do think your podcast and places like that, and people are looking for that kind of content.
Dustin, don't you think that the mainstream or the lamestream media, whatever people call it, is more, and even news programs are more hit and run?
Yeah.
The news programs are hit and run. Here's 2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
We've had a couple discussions here that have gone on for 10 minutes about one topic.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, people want to hear that insight. People want to be able to ask questions and get their questions answered.
Yeah.
And I think when you package, 2.5 or 3 minutes with a video clip entry, and then 2 minutes, today Alvin Bragg indicted Luigi, whatever. Let's talk about that case for a minute, because
before we go to that, you said people like to get their questions answered, and if you follow us on Facebook, X, LinkedIn, any of our social media, you can get notified when we do a live stream. You'll be able to watch this later on the podcast platforms. But we do have a question from the audience, and it says, "Those in power versus those who are out of power or powerless?" ? I'm not exactly sure what the that's what they're suggesting when we were talking about how it's changed in the legal and justice system. It's people in power versus those who are out of power or powerless. Is that what the distinction is? What do you think about that? Is that kind of how people are viewing the legal and justice system now?
Yeah, I think a lot of people view it that way. I think that regular everyday people do see things. They see when politicians get arrested for DWIs, when politicians get arrested and other things, and they see them getting a break that their kid wouldn't get, or politicians' kids getting pardoned and their kid wouldn't. So I do think the power dynamic is also in play, but that's beyond the lawfare, And I think what's interesting is, though, I think that there's a difference between holding people accountable, Dustin, in politicizing the justice system, because you don't get a pass because you can get away with something. If you did something illegal or criminal, you should be able to go after investigate that person. And if it truly is criminal, like the false statements, they indicted the guy who made statements about President Biden and his family. But yet there's also others that made statements about Trump that they didn't go after, So that shows you the difference.
So we're going to switch topics to the topic you want to talk about. I have a question here, and then also a comment. So from Paula, it says, great listening going on here. Thank you, Paula, for the comment, and we appreciate you watching and listening. And then, so one of the questions, you're in law enforcement, you're a sheriff. With the United Healthcare CEO assassination, from that perspective, the question is, did law enforcement do a good job? And what would have happened? Like once this happened, like what happens, a crime like this happens, and then what does law enforcement do to track down someone in a manhunt like this?
Well, what was great is the FBI, state police, and New York City police all worked together on this. And what you've seen here that's different is 10 years ago, there weren't cameras all over. Heck, New York City has capitalized on cameras all over the place, and they're able to put together where he was, where he had left. They found out where he was staying. They did a great job of tracking him, and I give kudos to the people at McDonald's who turned him in. But so law enforcement's come a long way. They're all communicating better, and with this case, and they had people in Georgia thinking he was going down there. There were people who knew who he was or thought they knew who he was. Maybe they didn't report it, see something, say something, but then in McDonald's they did. What I find disgusting, and this should really sicken any decent human being, is that they're trying to make a martyr out of him, or judge somebody on their looks. Oh, he's a good-looking guy. That's not a defense to a crime. And the healthcare industry is evil. I heard Senator Warren and another senator or a congressman make statements and then they retracted them. Well, I wasn't saying that it's okay to assassinate. No, you were saying it's okay. When you say people get sick of it and they take the law into their own hands, you are saying that, and it's wrong. Taking an innocent life over a grievance is wrong. I do think what's going to happen next is he'll come back to New York City. He'll be arraigned. They'll set up a schedule. And I believe that you'll see some sort of insanity or mental disease or defect defense, we call it in New York, to say that he was unable to understand the nature of his conduct. But here's what takes away from that. He stalked him. He knew where he was. He had a plan. He had a manifesto, similar actually to the Unabomber, who was from upstate New York in Schenectady. He actually showed you that he was thinking to do all these things. He hid his appearance. If he was truly mentally ill, he wouldn't be able to think of all these things he had to do.
Yeah.
There's stuff we haven't heard yet. They've probably been through his phone and his emails and his Google searches, and they'll tell us a lot. So the police did an excellent job. The citizens who cooperated did an excellent job. And I think it's disgusting that elected officials, and I think it's disgusting that other individuals are posting. The fellow the other day, it was on this morning, he was posting wanted T-shirts with pictures of CEOs of companies. I mean, there and that, not to confuse the two, but that triggers in the mentally ill that they're going to do something to get this evil person, just like they did to Trump.
Well, we started talking about the school shootings early on. Mm-hmm. One of the things I think people can do, and this is in the political and media arena, is, and I'm all for the moratorium on saying the person's name. Mm-hmm. So if someone does a horrible act like that, give them no notoriety. Just make them like erased from history almost. Just refer to them as the shooter, and that's it. They don't get anything else. Because I think when you do elevate that person, which this is one of the worst cases, I think, in recent history, where somebody is being canonized by people, and it is shocking to see and disgusting. I think that's a good way to put it. That the way they're some people are willing to even say in public. It's shocking. Shocking. I saw a Piers Morgan show. I don't remember the left-wing journalist's name, but she was saying good things about this guy.
Joy. She said joy.
Joy,
Took
yes.
joy in it.
That is crazy. Now, I do think this person has to be somewhat insane to do what he was doing. So what is actually the threshold for an insanity plea? Like, what is that? It's different by state, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, in New York State, it's mental disease or defect, and it's got to be that you have a mental disease or defect that renders you unable to appreciate the nature of your actions and that your actions are wrong. Okay. And so when we look at that from a defense standpoint, they have to show, like I had a case where a fella had, believed he had a chip in his head, and that they had, when he was a kid, he went in for appendicitis and the doctors put a chip in his head and he was getting that. I had another kid that believed he stabbed his grandmother to death. And they had years and years of psychiatric records that he would go into these psychotic situations where he thought he was Jesus Christ and where he thought that other people were there to get him, So you have to establish, a pattern is helpful for the defense, but you have to show that they did not understand the nature and consequences of their actions, or they did not appreciate the nature and consequences of their actions. And it's a pretty high.
Most of the well-known political assassins over the last 60 years, none of them would have really, except for maybe Reagan's, none of them really would have fit that bill, right?
Correct. Correct. I mean, Chapman was doing it because he was doing it for the love of Jodie Foster, and I think that you're right, that it's a high threshold. But again, that's separate than everyone who takes a human life has got to be twisted to some degree. You know what I mean?
There's some sort of God complex or something going on in that guy's head. He also apparently had an injury, and it makes you wonder how much that changed his mental state.
They said that, but then they showed all these pictures of him in Hawaii, smiling and having dinner with friends and out at the beach. And so I wondered, he didn't look as though somebody who was in pain. I don't know if he was on pain meds, but again, he flew here. How did he find out where this guy was going? He didn't get his insurance from United Healthcare. Originally, they speculated that his grandmother and someone else died because they weren't covered by insurance, but the family's got $30 million. So that's, crazy. Yeah. So more stuff will come out. Again, just like the shooting the other day. It started with 5 people, then 3 people. A lot of the early information we get is not
the fog of war. You can't. You really. This is a good point for just news in general. So-called news is you have to take it all with a grain of salt. And we've gone years with fake news that it takes a while before it gets corrected. So this has gotten people interested. So 2 questions on the law enforcement perspective. So the first one is around the face. So when his face was captured on camera, how quickly does law enforcement know? Like if they just get a little bit of that picture, how long does it take before they know?
Well, we have a system that we can identify them by putting the picture out there. The problem is in New York, like we used to have a system at the schools that just came out where you could identify individuals. And so what they said was, well, there's only a 92% accuracy rate and the higher incidence among non-whites for being misidentified by a percentage. So this system would be set up that you had to show your ID or your picture when you came to school to get in. And if you were on an order of protection or if you were a sex offender, you'd be in a database and they would compare you. So there's again, New York is a criminal friendly state and they're trying to limit what we access. We used to be able to knock on your door and say, hey, or call Ring. Could we have some of the Ring tapes from the neighborhood? Now you have to consent or we have to get a search warrant. They don't make it easy for law enforcement. They make it more difficult. That's why, part of this is I'm glad Alvin Bragg indicted this man as soon as he did. But
Yeah.
again, he's standing up there. What about all the other people that he hasn't indicted that have?
It would have been impossible for him not to do it. Like,
Yeah.
that's
No,
just-
no, I
it
don't
was
think he
never-
wasn't. No, he's definitely going to indict him. But my point is to stand up there and pretend he's a law and order prosecutor.
Yeah, no, that's
when
that's
there's
that's a joke. He
thousands of,
had to do his job on this one.
yeah, thousands of people. in front of
Otherwise
him.
he'd lose his job.
Correct.
So the other question was, so I don't know if this is accurate, but um, law enforcement said they knew who he was, but weren't going to release his name right away. What's the reasoning for doing that? If that's true?
If that's true, the reasoning is that I think Mayor Adams actually gave it away and said they knew who it is, but because they think he might be going to certain places that they knew, like to the family house, to other property. The family owned several properties. So they didn't want to spook him that they knew who he was and they were watching these places. So
Okay.
I think that could have been one of the reasons. I don't think he should have said that if they did, but
Yeah.
I think he was trying to say, look at how good they are.
Yeah.
You know?
But the reason it's an interesting question, because you would think, based on what you said earlier, with there's the people at McDonald's who turned them in.
Mhm.
Once people knew, it was pretty quick to find out. It's actually funny. So this all happened. I was at the dental surgeon last Monday, and my dental surgeon comes in and he tells me that this has been found out right before he's about to pull my tooth out, and he knew somebody who knew the guy who
Oh,
went.
okay.
He's from around
Huh.
Maryland and went to school with them in Townsend. And it's just shocking. Like right then, like as soon as they had said who his name was, he had been called by somebody who knew the guy or he went to school with him. So once that information's out there, it would seem like it would drudge up a lot of information. It would have everybody around the country be looking for this guy, and you're more likely to get the McDonald's situation.
Well, but let me ask you this.
Mhm.
If the people at McDonald's knew the name but didn't know him, the
Yeah.
name would not have made a difference to
That's
their
true.
ID. I think that he took his mask down to eat, they said, to eat McNuggets or something. So, or potatoes, hash browns or McNuggets. So the question is, there might have been some logistical things that you and I aren't aware of that they had, and reasons why they didn't want to, put his full face picture out there. They probably figured he was still hiding his face. I mean, some people wear the mask still for COVID, but younger people, I don't think a lot of younger people do,
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that makes sense. Well, on these other topics, any other ones that you think people need to know about? The last one I want to hear about is this Kentucky judge and sheriff situation. That is, what is the situation over there? It's not getting a lot of coverage because I think there's so many other legal cases.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk for hours on the legal cases. What happened is the latest is that the defense attorney is now suggesting that there was some child trafficking ring or sex ring, and that the sheriff's wife and daughter, because that's who he expressed interest of, the daughter's phone number was on the judge's phone. And that, I mean, sometimes family
What
friends.
happens, so people know, the sheriff shot the judge.
Yeah, the sheriff shot the judge in his chambers. They've been friends for years. They had lunch together, and at the lunch he says, "Well, this is something we should talk about in the office." And earlier in the week, there was examinations before trial in a civil case because the sheriff was accused in civilly of not doing enough to prevent one of his deputies from having sex in the courthouse with a person on probation, a female on probation. And it seems like the defense is now claiming that, hey, there's more stuff to come out about the judge and the sheriff's wife or daughter, and more people involved in this thing. And he was going to argue mental disease and defect there, that he thinks it should be reduced from an intentional murder to extreme emotional disturbance, which is interesting. I want to say one thing before we wrap up, if I could.
Yeah.
I think I often say it, Dustin, because I think it's important. The law enforcement profession is the one profession that you condemn us, you want to defund us, you spit on us, you shoot rockets at us and throw cold frozen bottles of water at us. You ambush us. And then next day you call 911 and you ask for help. And our dispatchers don't say, what's your race, what's your religion, what's your politics. They say, what's your emergency and where are you?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that needs to be brought up all the time. The other thing is the criminal justice system, Back the Blue, is really so much more than Back the Blue. It starts with the dispatchers. The dispatchers are not paid a heck of a lot of money for what they do, but you call 911 and they're the ones who see if it's an emergency that you need an ambulance, a fire truck, or a police officer, and they send them. And without the dispatchers, the rest of us don't get there to help.
So that's and something I thought was interesting. You have a great episode with the dispatchers about 911 system. You actually talk to several dispatchers, and one of the things you do on your program on the Rich Giardino show, people should check it out. And anywhere you get podcasts, also subscribe to it on YouTube, like you should with Political Trade Secrets. And I like that you have the I think the vice president of the Fraternal Order of Police. You've had the head of the Sheriff's Association. You had all sorts of people who have law enforcement backgrounds, other lawyers. One thing that I think is also interesting, we mentioned it at the beginning, but they're in Fulton County in the region. One of the things you do on the podcast is go into cold cases, very popular thing. People are very interested in them. But mention one of the cold cases that you've been following, you've been looking into, and you've been doing interviews on, and as you tell people where to find your podcast and to go sign up, of course, and tell us a little bit about that cold case.
Yeah, well, first of all, you can find me at the Rich Giardino Show on X, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Apple, Rumble or Ramble. I don't even know the name anymore. But those you could, share, subscribe, and like. Please do that. I appreciate it. The cold case we're looking at is Kelly Sue Ackernite. And it's interesting. She disappeared 16 years ago. She left work in Amsterdam, New York at our pharmacy. And the next thing, a couple hours later, her car was found burning in Frog Hollow in Johnstown City. She was nowhere to be found. There was a stream, a pond nearby. They searched that. They worked hundreds of leads over the last 16 years. And the chief of police has been working diligently with his investigators and the state police. And we had the chief on, he told the story, and then her husband wanted to come on and tell his side of the story because he was accused of murdering her. A lot of people felt he did it. And a little interesting fact that didn't come out in the podcast was that the husband recently remarried and marked on the marriage license that he was single. So that's an interesting factor.
And he never got it annulled or never did any of the paperwork.
Never had her declared missing or dead, dead after 7 years in New York. And then her daughter, Ashley, came on, and her daughter's very articulate and intelligent. And she said she doesn't have anything to do with her father, but she said she doesn't believe her father did it, but she believes he may know who did it. But she wanted answers. She just wants to know where her mother is.
Yeah.
And she doesn't believe necessarily she's alive, but she wants to know where she is so she can have closure.
Yeah.
And that's so important in these cases. And what's interesting is it's funny because cold cases get solved for a variety of reasons. A lot of times it's the advancements in DNA. It's also other things that we happen to come across. So like somebody makes an admission or confession when out drinking, and then they don't want to say anything that their friend admitted it to them. But now years later, they get thinking, well, what if that was my daughter, my sister, or my mother?
Yeah.
So if anyone has information on Kelly Sue Ackernite, who went missing in the Fulton County area 16 years ago, get a hold of Chief Gilbo from the Johnstown Police Department. And Dustin, I really want to thank you again for the opportunity to be on your program. I enjoyed it. I hope that I was able to educate some people and also answer some of your questions.
No, it was really great having you, and I've enjoyed being on your podcast, The Rich Giardino Show. I've also enjoyed being on WGY when you've been guest hosting their morning program, and you're an excellent guest host for the radio program. And It's really great to be there. And next week I'll be on your program again to talk about our end of the year survey at American Pulse, where we're going to be talking about really what Americans, how they're processing 2024 and what they think looking forward to 2025. Are they optimistic? Are they pessimistic? What they actually think? And I'm looking forward to talk about that with you next week on your podcast, and people should check that out as well. But Rich, thank you again very much. Really do appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks a lot. Good talking to you, Dustin.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here today and for checking out our conversation, talking about, is this the end of lawfare with the election of President Trump? What's going on with all these different cases and how they touch on politics, and really a lot of legal news in the last few months, which has been fascinating. And it's great to have somebody with such a wealth of knowledge with Rich Giardino, the host of the Rich Giardino Show, current sheriff, former prosecutor, former judge, and former law professor, has a lot of different experience and really was able to illuminate some of these topics. And thank you for all the questions we've received. We haven't been able to get to all of them, but thank you for the ones we were able to get to. And we'll follow up with anybody who we haven't been able to get to. So if you watch the live stream, thank you for doing so. And if you didn't, and you're watching this on one of the podcasting platforms, if you follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, X, you can sign up to follow us. You see that little bell and you click to get notifications from us. You'll know if we go live, and you can participate in the program. But otherwise, really, you can watch us on YouTube, and you can watch us on Rumble. You can check us out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and please do follow and subscribe there. Really does make a difference for the program. And if you want to get that final end of year 2024 poll that we're going to be doing, finding out what Americans think about the country at this point and looking forward to the new Trump administration, please go to pollingclub.com, sign up now, and you'll get that when it's hot off the presses later this week and into next week. Also, you can find out where I'm on different news programs over the holidays. But thank you so much for being here, for checking this out, and do check out Rich's program. And we'll see you on the next episode of Political Trade Secrets.
Join us next time by subscribing on iTunes, and get show notes and sign up for our newsletter at politicaltradesecrets.com.